I'm Morgan Buck, and for our presentation today, we're going to be looking at the spending by the MLB teams and their win percentage. So the question that we're asking is, we're looking at the relationship between the spending of MLB teams and their success. For the measures, we're going to be using the standard regression and hypothesis test. For the data, we're looking at the wins and the spending. For the methods, we're going to be using regression analysis and residual plots. And then in the end, we're going to look at the relationships and our findings for the conclusion. So the question framing our motivation, we know that sports are widely popular in the US and they generate hundreds of millions of dollars every year due to ticket sales, concessions, and other public-based purchases. And then we are interested in investigating the amounts of spending by MLB teams. We want to know if the money that the people invest are impactful on the team's performance.
Right, I'm Maddie Fisher, and I'm going to be talking about our approach to research in this project. To guide ourselves in the research, these are the questions that we decided to ask. The first question is, what is the average amount of spending? The second one was, what is the average amount of wins? And these are both over the last 10 years. And the third one is, what is the relationship between money spent and the amount of success? And then the last question was, is there a strong correlation between those two? And then the numbers we decided to use in our data were the average number of wins for each of the 30 teams and the average total spending on players each year by each team. And then what if a team's spending varies greatly? That will lead to averages being skewed, misplacing them on the scatter plot, and which can ultimately alter data and our regression results.
Hi, I'm Madison Sir, and I'm going to be stating our assumptions for this project. So our first assumption is that the population of potential error term is normally distributed, which means that the sum of the residuals is going to be 0, and that means that the variance above and below the trend line is going to be the same. Our second assumption is values of the error term are statistically independent. Our third assumption is that team success and payroll levels can be represented by their average over 10 years. Our fourth assumption is going to be that payroll levels for each team represent a sum of all team players' salaries for that team. Our fifth assumption is going to be the other factors outside spending levels are insignificant in determining a team's overall success. And then our final assumption is going to be that success is measured by regular season wins and postseason wins are not included. And then for the tests that we're going to be running, our null hypothesis is that the higher spending on players in the MLB has no impact on overall team success. And then our alternative hypothesis is going to be that higher spending on players in the MLB does have an impact on overall team success.
Hello, my name is Patrick Bakken, and I'm going to be telling you about the data that we used for this project. So, for the number of wins, we have each team listed as 30 rows, as well as the number of wins over a 10-year span, and then the average number of wins in the last column. We gathered all of this data from ESPN.com. For the number of spending over 10 years, we have 10 columns for spending over 10 years, the 30 teams as well in the rows, and then the average number of spending in the last column. This is just a scatter chart that shows the average payroll and the average number of wins, and we included the regression line and equation as well as the coefficient of determination. For the methodology we used, we went with standard linear regression with the number of wins being the dependent variable and the amount of spending as the independent variable. We also used the assumptions that were previously stated, and we used the level of significance of 0.05. One of the alternatives that we were thinking about using that we did not go with for this project was multiple regression using a quadratic model. The reason that we did not go with this method, however, is because it did not increase the R-squared value to a significant degree.
My name is Matt Richards, and I'll be talking about how exactly we carried out our regression. So we began by designating overall spending as the direct cause of overall success in team wins. we continue with those same assumptions that we stated earlier in the PowerPoint. As Patrick mentioned, our dependent variable is going to be a team's number of wins, and our independent variable will be their spending over that 10-year period. We chose this because we are trying to determine the relationship that spending has on wins, meaning that wins are going to be affected by spending, making it the dependent variable. And then at the end of our regression, we'll be able to evaluate our p-values to determine whether or not there is a relationship between spending and a team's success in wins. So other considerations that we had to kind of keep in mind throughout the process was, one of them was multicollinearity, which is something that can cause problems when you have multiple x variables in your regression analysis. If there's between those x variables or independent variables, if there's a strong relationship between those, it can ruin and mess up your numbers after you run your regression. For us, that wasn't an issue because we only had one x variable. And then also another process that could have messed up our data would be gathering data in a way that the spending of one team is dependent on another. Major League Baseball, it's not set up like that. Every team is able to spend money how they choose, and it's not impacted by another team, so that was not an issue for us. So now with our data that we have, like we mentioned, we just ran standard linear regression. Our residual plot that we constructed with our data, we had to evaluate that, make sure there was not any suspicious behavior. As you can see here, it's very evenly distributed above and below the mean, which is a good thing. There's nothing to be suspicious about. Our R-squared value of 0.364, that means that 36.4% of the variation in a team's wins can be explained by the variation in the independent variable, which is spending in our case. And then lastly, highlighted here are the coefficients of the regression equation. The intercept is 70.47, which means that if a team was to not spend any money at all, they could expect to win 70 or 71 games, which is well below the league average. And then also the coefficient for the average payroll in millions is 0.10, which means that for every 1 unit increase in that statistic, a team can expect to win 0.10 more games. So it would take approximately $10 million more in spending for a team to see a unit of 1 increase in their win total. Continuing with our conclusion, we can see that our p-values are both below our benchmark of 0.05, meaning that we can conclude, or we can reject our null hypothesis that there is no relationship and accept our alternative hypothesis that there is a relationship between spending and a team's wins. Like I mentioned, here is our regression equation using the coefficients from our regression analysis. And lastly, a couple weaknesses of our process could be the R-squared value isn't incredibly high. 0.36 is not the highest R-squared value out there. This could be increased by looking at more years of data. One reason that we chose the 10-year period and not a wider range of time is that doing so would have to take into account like inflation and amount of money that a team would typically spend on a typical player. For the sake of this project, that was just more complexity, or it was more complex than what was needed for this project and was not something that we were interested in evaluating. That is the conclusion of our project, and here that is a summary of our findings.